Have you ever wondered what you would do if someone judged you without knowing anything about you? What if the judgment was so harsh, so public, that it would leave you questioning your own worth? What if a single act of kindness could turn the tables and give you more power than you ever thought possible? This story begins in a bustling supermarket, where people come and go, picking up their groceries, checking out, and going about their daily lives. But for Marcus, a man in his mid-30s, this was about to be anything but an ordinary trip. He had no idea that this mundane errand would ignite a chain of events that would change his life forever. As Marcus stood in line, casually browsing through his phone, he felt a presence behind him. He could hear the shuffling of footsteps and the mutter of impatience. When he turned, he met the eyes of a woman standing directly behind him. She was glaring, her face twisted in an expression of distaste, her lips curling into a thin, judgmental line. Marcus, taken aback, gave her a polite nod, but the woman wasn't interested in pleasantries. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are you seriously going to hold up the line for a simple transaction? You people never know how to hurry." Marcus's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" he asked, confused by her sudden hostility. "Oh, don't pretend you don't know. You people always take forever. Why don't you just go back to where you came from?" she sneered, not even bothering to hide her disdain. The words hit Marcus like a slap in the face, and for a moment he stood there, stunned. He didn't know how to react. He was used to the occasional rude comment or glance, but this was different. Her words were sharp, cutting, and public. He could feel the eyes of others beginning to turn towards them. For a brief second, a wave of anger surged through him. He thought about snapping back at her, throwing an insult right back in her face, but something inside him told him to stay calm, to let it slide. Instead, Marcus did something unexpected. He turned his gaze back to the cashier, who was now looking at the interaction nervously. "Actually, it seems like you're the one holding up the line," Marcus said coolly with a touch of sarcasm. He turned back to the woman, locking eyes with her. "I'll just go ahead and pay for my groceries while you figure out whatever issue you've got." The woman opened her mouth, but Marcus was already stepping forward. His calm demeanor contrasted with the growing tension in the air. The cashier hesitated for a moment, but then began scanning Marcus's items. The woman's face turned red as she realized what was happening. Before she could say another word, the transaction was complete. Marcus took his receipt and bagged his items without another glance at the woman. He stepped aside, making way for her, his mind spinning with disbelief. But the woman wasn't done yet. "Yeah, that's what I thought," she muttered under her breath, but the words were drowned out by the murmurs of the people around her. The atmosphere shifted. The cashier, sensing the tension, looked at Marcus with an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry about that," she whispered, not daring to say more. Marcus merely nodded, his gaze now fixed on the woman who had tried to humiliate him. He didn't need to say a word. The stares of the other shoppers were enough. She wasn't getting away with this. As Marcus made his way to the exit, he couldn't help but feel a mix of frustration and satisfaction. He had been insulted, but he had refused to let her words define him. Little did he know, this encounter would ignite a movement that would force the woman to face her own ignorance, and soon the whole world would be watching. But what would happen next? Would the woman realize her mistake? Would Marcus's act of kindness and composure bring justice, or would it backfire in ways he couldn't predict? Stay tuned, because the real story was just beginning. The tension in the supermarket was thick, and Marcus could feel it lingering in the air as he walked toward the exit. But just as he reached the automatic doors, something made him pause. A soft murmur rippled through the line, growing louder by the second. He turned back. The woman, now at the register, was frantically rummaging through her purse. Her expression had shifted from smug superiority to pure panic. The cashier, a young woman with tired eyes, looked at her with an apologetic yet firm expression. "Ma'am, your card has been declined." A hush fell over the nearby shoppers. A few exchanged glances, Some whispered among themselves. The same people who had witnessed her racist remark now saw her in a completely different light. Marcus raised an eyebrow. He hadn't planned on staying any longer, but something in the air told him that this situation was far from over. The woman huffed, swiping her card again. "Try it one more time," she snapped. The cashier did, but the result was the same. "I'm sorry, but it's not going through." The woman's face flushed. She fumbled in her bag, pulling out another card, but her fingers trembled as she handed it over. The people in line weren't even trying to hide their curiosity anymore. That's when Marcus did something no one expected. Stepping forward, he reached into his wallet, pulled out his card, and handed it to the cashier. "I got it," he said, his voice calm and unwavering. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The woman froze, her mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. The cashier hesitated. "Are you sure?" Marcus nodded. "Just ring it up." The room seemed to stand still as the cashier swiped his card. The machine beeped, confirming the purchase. The woman's total, over $100, was now paid in full by the very man she had just insulted. For a moment, silence. Then whispers. People were turning to one another, shaking their heads, murmuring in disbelief. Did he just pay for her? After what she said? Unbelievable. The woman, still frozen in shock, looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. Why would you do that?" she finally stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus simply shrugged. "Because kindness isn't about who deserves it," he said, locking eyes with her. "It's about who needs it." The words hit her harder than she expected. Her lips pressed together, and for the first time that day she didn't have a snide remark. She didn't have anything to say at all, but the people around them did. Someone in line scoffed. "Wow, the guy you just disrespected is the one who saved you. That's karma right there." "How does it feel?" Another person chimed in. "You judged him, and the automatic doors slid open behind Marcus, letting in a gust of warm evening air. He took a deep breath, ready to leave it all behind, but something made him hesitate. The hushed voices inside the store had turned into full conversations. People were no longer whispering. They were openly talking about what had just happened. Some were shaking their heads, others were glaring at the woman, and a few were even pulling out their phones as if they were about to start recording. Marcus wasn't interested in a spectacle. He had done what he felt was right, and that was enough. But then, a voice, low and shaky, cut through the murmurs. "Excuse me." It was her. Marcus turned around. The woman stood there, gripping her bag so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes, there was something different in them. He didn't say anything. He just waited. She glanced around as if searching for an escape, but the weight of the crowd's stares held her in place. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I don't understand why you did that." Marcus studied her for a moment, then simply said, "Because I could." Her brow furrowed, frustration flickering across her face. "But I was awful to you. I didn't deserve—" "That's the thing," Marcus interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Kindness isn't about what people deserve. It's about what's right." The crowd had fallen silent again. People weren't just watching now. They were listening. The woman let out a sharp breath and shook her head. "I don't need your charity." Marcus gave her a small, knowing smile. "Then pay it forward." She blinked. "What?" "You don't have to thank me. You don't have to like me. But one day when you see someone struggling, someone you might have ignored or judged before, help them. That's how you pay me back." The woman stared at him, her lips pressing into a thin line. For a second, Marcus thought she might scoff and walk away. But instead, something in her expression shifted. Regret, shame, maybe even understanding. The crowd seemed to sense it too. Someone muttered, "Damn. He really flipped the script on her." Another voice, this time a middle-aged woman near the front of the line, spoke up. "You know, dear, you should be thanking him instead of arguing." A man behind her nodded. "Yeah, that could have been anyone in this line, and I doubt any of us would have done what he did after what you said to him." The woman exhaled sharply, looking like she wanted to crawl out of her own skin. She turned to the cashier, then back to Marcus. Her fingers tightened around the grocery bags once more. Then, finally, she lowered her gaze. "Thank you." It was barely a whisper. Marcus nodded. "Take care." And with that, he turned and walked out. But the story wasn't over yet, because as the doors slid shut behind him, the people inside weren't just watching her anymore. They were waiting to see if she'd change. And for the first time, she was the one feeling judged. The woman stood frozen in place, her hands gripping the grocery bags like they were the only thing keeping her upright. The weight of the crowd's silent judgment pressed down on her, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel in control. Her face burned with shame. She wasn't used to being on this side of things, being the one people whispered about, the one being scrutinized. The cashier, still wide-eyed, cleared her throat and asked, "Would you like your receipt, ma'am?" The woman barely nodded, grabbing it without a word before turning toward the exit. As she walked, she could feel the eyes on her back. She didn't understand it. She had spent her whole life believing certain things, acting a certain way, never really questioning herself. But now, a man she had insulted, humiliated, had turned around and done something for her that she never would have done for him. And worse, he hadn't done it to prove a point. He had done it simply because he could. That was what rattled her the most. She pushed through the exit, stepping out into the dimly lit parking lot. She spotted Marcus walking toward his car, his posture relaxed, completely unbothered. Something inside her twisted. Before she could talk herself out of it, she hurried forward. "Hey." Marcus paused, turning slightly. His face remained unreadable. The woman hesitated. She didn't even know what she was going to say. What was she supposed to do? Apologize? Would that even matter at this point? She cleared her throat. "I still don't get why you did that." Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I already told you." "I know," she said quickly. I don't understand you." A dry chuckle escaped him. "You don't have to." She frowned. "I don't like owing people." Marcus raised a brow. "Then do something good for someone else. That way, you don't owe me. You owe them." The woman opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Marcus just nodded and turned to leave again. But this time, she didn't stop him. Instead, she stood there in the parking lot, gripping the grocery bags that weren't even hers, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. Small. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Because maybe, just maybe, it meant she had room to grow. The woman sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel as if it could anchor her to something solid. Her mind was a whirlwind, replaying everything that had happened inside the supermarket. She had been so sure of herself, so certain of how the world worked. But now, she wasn't so sure anymore. Marcus hadn't argued with her. He hadn't raised his voice or thrown insults back at her. He had simply acted. And that was what unsettled her the most. She had spent her whole life believing that kindness was transactional, that respect had to be earned. But Marcus had respected her when she hadn't deserved it. He had helped her without expecting anything in return. Why? She stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time, she didn't like what she saw. Her chest felt tight as she thought about the way the crowd had turned against her, the way their faces had shifted from silent agreement to disgust. Had they always looked at her like that? Had she just never noticed? She exhaled shakily and reached for her purse. Her hands fumbled as she dug through it, searching for something, anything, to distract herself. Her fingers brushed against her phone. Before she could second-guess herself, she unlocked it and pulled up a search bar. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she typed, "How to unlearn prejudice." The screen loaded, bringing up articles, books, and personal stories. She scrolled through them, her heart pounding. Her gaze landed on a quote. "When you know better, do better." She swallowed hard. She had spent years thinking she already knew everything she needed to. But maybe she had been wrong. Maybe it wasn't too late to change. The next few days were uncomfortable in a way the woman had never experienced before. She had always lived with a sense of certainty. Certainty in her beliefs, in her opinions, in the way the world worked. But now, she felt something foreign creeping in. Doubt. She found herself revisiting that moment in the supermarket over and over again. The way the crowd had turned against her. The way Marcus had looked at her, not with anger, not with hatred, but with something far worse. Pity. She hated it. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized, maybe she didn't hate the pity itself. Maybe she hated knowing that she had deserved it. For the first time in her life, she wanted to change. And change, she quickly learned, was not easy. She spent hours reading, watching videos, listening to people's stories. Every time she came across something that made her uncomfortable, she forced herself to sit with it instead of running away. She had spent years believing things without ever questioning them. And now, she questioned everything. But reading wasn't enough. She needed to do something. It took her 3 days to work up the courage, but eventually, she found herself back in the same supermarket, standing at the customer service desk. The cashier from before was working again. When she saw her, her expression tensed slightly, as if she expected another problem. Instead, the woman took a slow breath and said, "I need to talk to Marcus." The cashier blinked in surprise. "You mean the guy from the other day?" She nodded. The cashier hesitated, then pointed toward the back of the store. "He's in aisle 7. Her heart pounded as she walked down the aisles, scanning for him. And then, there he was. Marcus was crouched down, reaching for something on the bottom shelf. He didn't see her at first. She cleared her throat. "Hey." He turned, his face unreadable. "Oh, it's you." She shifted on her feet. "Yeah, it's me." A silence stretched between them. Finally, she swallowed and said, She stopped, exhaled, and tried again. "I wanted to say thank you." Marcus studied her for a moment. "For what?" "For paying for my groceries," she said. "For not making a scene. For being better than me." His lips twitched slightly, but he didn't say anything. She hesitated, then continued. "I also wanted to say I'm sorry." At that, Marcus raised a brow. "Sorry for what?" Her throat tightened. She had never apologized like this before. "For how I treated you. For assuming things. For—" She exhaled. "For everything." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Okay." She blinked. "That's it?" "What else do you want?" he asked, his tone calm. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She had expected resistance, or maybe some grand moment of redemption. But Marcus wasn't interested in making her feel better about herself. He had already moved on. And maybe that was the final lesson she needed. Change wasn't about being forgiven. It wasn't about making people see her differently. It was about becoming someone different. She nodded, swallowing hard. "All right, then." As she turned to leave, Marcus called after her. "Hey." She paused. Marcus studied her, then said, "Just keep going." The words were simple, but for the first time she understood what they meant. She walked out of the supermarket that day knowing she wasn't a different person yet. But maybe, just maybe, she was on her way to becoming one. Thanks for watching this video. Now tell me in the comments, what would you have done in this situation? And what's your opinion on this story? Consider subscribing so I can keep bringing you stories like this.